The U.S. Army is in dire straits to meet recruiting goals. They missed the recruiting goal in 2022 by 25%. So is it time to restructure or downsize? Hi folks, and welcome back to the Storming Cellar. In a recent article published in the Army Times, Army Secretary Christine Wormuth said some of the moves to the recruiting challenges that we've been experiencing, if we don't turn our recruiting situation around, we will likely have to contemplate additional force structure changes because we can't have unready forces, we can't have hollow formations. For once, I have to agree with her in principle. However, I believe that the train has already left the station. Recruiting is not going to get any better anytime soon. The military's woke DEI atmosphere, coupled with a population of woke young adults who lack the love of country, hinder any kind of recruiting success. The Army goal is to cut some units and restructure others, but the proof's in the pudding, as they say. For those historians or older folks like me who remember the aftermath of the end of the Vietnam War, the military was drawn down to a hollow force that took years to rebuild until finally President Reagan truly built back better. It even took years during his administration to build a venerable military force that ultimately caused the Soviet Union, who knew their economy couldn't keep up to support a military to counter the U.S., to throw in the towel and collapse. Wormuth detailed an effort to identify and eliminate excess units and restructure others to remove unnecessary billets that she said will allow the force to stand up purpose-built units for short-range air defense, indirect fire protection, and multi-domain operations. What a mouthful. We're transforming to an Army that is focused on multi-domain operations against a near-peer competitor that requires us to bring in new capabilities and new force structure. Okay, there's always fat that can be trimmed out of any organization, definitely staff positions. I also buy this if it's done properly, which I doubt it will be. So what is multi-domain operations?
It places just as much emphasis on competition as it does on conflict. Army forces conduct multi-domain operations to defeat the adversary standoff by competing short of armed conflict. When necessary, Army forces rapidly transition to conflict and penetrate and disintegrate enemy A2AD systems. They subsequently exploit opportunities to achieve strategic objectives and force a return to competition on favorable terms. In short, the answer to the problem of an enemy's layered standoff is to compete, penetrate, disintegrate, exploit, and recompete.
Well, essentially, it's a concept that uses a competitive advantage over a near-peer adversary like China and Russia by hitting them with multi-complementary threats that exposes adversaries' weaknesses. But what she's really talking about here is less troops, but a more technologically advanced army with a multi-threat axis. She stated the cuts will come from restructuring of Army Special Forces and reducing or eliminating close combat forces that were purpose-built for the war on terror. Again, may we assume the war on terror is basically over? Will we see future conflicts in places like Afghanistan or door-to-door fighting like in Fallujah? Look, due to poor recruiting and retention, the U.S. Army is severely short to man its 31 brigade combat teams. That doesn't allow the U.S. the ability to fight a simultaneous two-front war with, say, Russia and China, much less the ability to engage in concurrent combat actions in other parts of the world. She is correct, however, the Army cannot sustain its current 31 brigades. The Secretary actually has no choice but to make hard reduction decisions until they can get off their butts and come to the realization that no one wants to join the Army, and ask the reason why. As with the Army after Vietnam, these cuts are only temporary fixes and doesn't solve the long-term problem. In May, the Secretary testified to Senate Armed Services Committee to, do we need to have 60 cooks in a unit, or can we use 40 cooks? Well, apparently, yes, they do need 60 cooks. In one of my recent videos, I showed where several Army bases failed to feed their troops. This entire summer, a huge Army base, Fort Cavazos, Texas only had 2 out of 10 dining facilities open because of deployments and lack of funding. Look, to keep your car running, you got to put gas in the tank. The same goes for soldiers. You've got to feed them. Apparently, Secretary Wormuth didn't get the memo. The Secretary also told Army Times the service developed a unit priority list from an analysis of historical deployment data. Units that hadn't deployed recently or perhaps at all were evaluated as potential candidates for reductions. Here's where we get into the hollowing out of the force and creating piecemeal combat units. Let's face it, we hope we never have to deploy troops in combat. It's not like throwing away old food in the refrigerator. This is like freeze-drying your food and then breaking out a combat force to put into action anytime and anywhere later on. The Secretary noted that the Army Special Operations community has more than doubled in size since the September 11 attacks. We're looking at their function that can be provided by conventional Army forces, she said. That might make sense if the Army determines they won't be continuously fighting this type of warfare. But remember, Special Ops is the most highly trained soldiers in the Army. After Vietnam, the U.S. Army decimated its Spec Ops forces, resulting in a loss of thousands of highly trained soldiers, which created a mess for those specific requirements needed in the future. Wormuth identified enablers, or non-special operations qualified support personnel, as a target for cuts, arguing that the general purpose forces can provide that support. This is perhaps true if she's talking about strictly maybe cooks and administrative personnel. Asked to elaborate on what types of combat units she believes are on the chopping block, Wormuth gave some ho-hum answers and talked around the issue, stating, "That's the kind of thing that I need to talk to the congressional oversight committees about before commenting publicly." This tells me it's going to be ugly, and the Army's about to take it in the shorts. Despite her optimism that the Army is progressing well in its force reduction evolution, the service's top civilian cautioned, though, that the recruiting crisis could derail the plan or damage the Army's ability to stay ready in the interim. "We really need to continue to work hard to solve our recruiting challenges," she added, lest it force additional cuts. Well, this sounds like she realizes that recruiting is not fixable and cuts are inevitable. All right, here's the straight and skinny on what's happening. Politically, the Democrats have always reduced military funding to use for social programs. It's in the history books. Go back and look. In light of the economic mess in the U.S. with trillions in debt and social promises to keep, the military, and in this case the Army, is an easy target. Also, if you reduce the Army because of a failed recruiting policy, you can cut 5 to 7 brigades and make it look like there isn't a recruiting problem at all. Unfortunately, the Chinese are massively building its military, and the U.S. is reducing its combat forces. It's the old smoke and mirrors routine where, in a week, Americans will forget that the military has been raped and the recruiting problem instantly goes away. What a fun day at the beach this is going to be, folks. So what do y'all think about the Secretary of the Army's plan? Is it viable and necessary, or politically motivated? Please leave your comments below. I really want to hear what you got to say on this. Remember, if you like the video, hit the like button, subscribe, and follow. Be sure to share with those you like and those you don't like. So until next time, make sure all your takeoff and landings equal